yeah, it's great to being able to share the work that we did within this project to all the yeah people working with forecasting across Europe and also around the world. Because yeah, it's also great that this is recorded and we can share it, and we are really happy for that. So yeah, as you said, I will talk today about modeling the bird's annual cycle using the Eurobird portal. And probably you don't know what it is, but I hope that after the seminar you will know. And this is a project that it was funded mostly by the European Food Safety Authority, the EFSA. And it was a large collaboration between the Institute of Catalonia of Ornithology, Epimundi, which is an epidemiological center, also doing modeling with epidemiological problems, the British Trust of Ornithology, the BTO, URIN, which is the European Ring Center, and us as Sovon and the Eurobird portal. So let's begin. So as you probably know, well, in nature we have a big diversity of species, including birds, right? Which basically drive many of our careers to study this diversity and to understand what's happening with this diversity, right? And in that way, ornithologists decide to also create a huge diversity of online portals to gather bird observations across Europe and across the world. So this is just a snapshot of some of the portals that are regularly used by people that like birds across Europe to gather bird observations. But of course, ideally, we will have all that information centralized together in one single place, or everyone will do the same. But because we humans are also quite diverse, we like to have this diversity of portals. Everyone likes their own portal, which is totally fine. But in 2015, from the European Bird Census Council, the EBCC, together with a live project, they put to run the Eurobird portal, which actually tries to bring together all these different online portals gathering bird data into one single location, into one single database. So then, thanks to that, we gather, or it was gathered, already more than 700 million observations, which are in many cases, or in most cases, like 2/3 of the data are casual observations, like just people going into the field and then saying, "Hey, I saw a gray lag goose in the field," for example. But many people also make complete list, and a complete list is basically people going to the field and going for a walk and just registering all the different species that they see, and also all the numbers of those species that they see. And all of that together now is in this Eurobird portal in the EVP data, which is really a massive work, and it's amazing to have it together at the European scale. And thanks to that, we can already start to see the phenology of the species. We can see how species migrate, where more observed or less observed at a different time of the year. But as you can imagine, well, there are many gaps in this data, and you can see that in some places we see some of these gaps. That doesn't mean that the species is not there, but it means that we simply don't have the data. So that's why we need to model it. But as you can imagine, with such a rich data set, researchers and people in general were already looking for applications. Now, immediately when we have all this massive data together, all this big data together, we are looking for applications. And in the recent years, one of the main threats for wildlife and for wild birds, it was the avian influenza. So avian influenza actually is a very pathogenic virus that affects massively species. So the EFSA is really concerned also because if avian influenza is introduced into the poultry level, so if a wild bird infects a chicken, that can cause a lot of damage also for our food security and food system, right? So they systematically generate reports about the overview of avian influenza in the different years. And we saw with those reports that, for example, the year 2021 and 22, we had really large peaks, also in 2023. And these large outbreaks of avian influenza actually caused massive deaths of population. So here is a population, I think this was in Edinburgh, of gannets, of seabirds. And you can see the difference between 1 year and 2 years after, how this population was completely vanished due to this large outbreak of avian influenza. So basically, EFSA wanted to also create a alarm system to try to predict the risk of entry and establishment of this avian influenza from wild birds, because we know that wild birds, they can carry this influenza and they move a lot. And if they get in contact with these poultry farms, as I said, then they can cause a lot of damage. So they develop a call and a project to try to create this early warning system for avian influenza. And basically, this early warning system consisted on creating abundance models at the weekly scale for certain species, like they possess quite a big risk of having the influenza, together with local and long distance movements that we know that they happen thanks to the ringing data, and then combine that with the HPA outbreaks that the EFSA gathers in different locations across Europe. And thanks to that, try to combine it in an epidemiological model that can calculate the probability of transmission from a given outbreak to a given location. So try to make a probability model that tell us how likely is that an outbreak, especially in poultry farms, will happen. And actually, that was the project. In very simple words, we managed to make such a early warning system. This is online. You can visit it, and it's updated. Almost online. It's quite updated, and we can see how certain areas, they become really problematic if there is a combination of certain species and an outbreak. Then we see that it is possible that avian influenza affects the poultry farms. So then that creates an early warning system to tell the farmers, especially like, hey, it's likely that there is an outbreak, so maybe it's good that you keep your chickens inside. But of course, this is the nice the final result and the nice story. But since I think people in this audience are quite interested in the models that we develop, I will talk you through the models that we created at Sovon about the abundance of birds at the weekly scale. So the aim could be summarized in just this simple sentence: try to calculate, to predict, and to make weekly abundance maps at 10 by 10 kilometers grid cells all over Europe. But of course, that's not easy. So we need rich data, and that data is basically coming from the EVP. We started with the first set of species that basically was the waterfalls, so geese and ducks, because they were the first sets of the species that they were massively affected by avian influenza. In a second set of species, we included also some seagulls and other bird species that we know that they also suffer from avian influenza. And of course, we use the Eurobird portal data because, as I showed at the beginning, this is a very rich data set, including complete lists, but also these fixed lists and casual observations. And we started with the period 2015 to 2021. So per grid cell of 10 by 10 kilometers all across Europe, we aggregated the data. We decreased the effect of outliers. We created the very large values because sometimes in these heterogeneous data sets, there are very large outliers that we need to take care of it. And then we started the modeling process. Uh, for the different covariables that we use in these models, we included covariables that they tell us a bit about the sampling efforts during the different visits of the people in the field. So how many observations per square kilometer we had, how many observers we had in the different days, how many days, and the number of species that in each result we had. We included all those sampling effort variables in the models, plus environmental variables of all kinds. So in total, there were around 41 variables, including topographic variables like altitude and slope, or climatic variables like the typical bioclimatic variables like annual precipitation, mean annual temperature, uh, temperature range during the day, all those things. And also habitat and land use variables. So to know where do we have forest, or how much forest is in the area, or agriculture areas, all that type of variables. But now is, of course, the time to talk about models, and it's the time to explode a bit your head, because these type of models, they might be a bit, yeah, mindfuck, let's say. But the simple idea is that we do species distribution models, and these species distribution models, I guess that many of you are, yeah, connected to them, or you know what they are. But in essence, is that we use these environmental layers that I mentioned, together with the species distributions that we know from, for example, the EVP data. We put it together with a model which can be as simple as a linear model or any model, and that give us the correlation and the relationship between the environmental variables and the species, and then we can predict the potential or the current distribution of the species, but also infer into future distributions, right? But when you have such a rich data set, but also heterogeneous and at a large scale, and you want spatiotemporal models, you need to do something else. You cannot just simply do simple SDMs. So what we use is something called adaptive spatiotemporal exploratory models, or ADA-STEMs. And basically, these models, they apply a philosophy that is called split, apply, and combine philosophy. So basically, we split the data in spatiotemporal pixels, they call it, or stixels. You train those stixels separately, and then you aggregate them again, you combine them again. And of course, this might sound difficult, and it is. So I want you to stay with me and walk through the process. So hopefully, at the end of the presentation, you understand how these models work a bit more, and maybe you can apply them. Briefly mention that I apply them using this StemFlow package, which is a Python package. It's not an R package, but it's a Python package, and that is quite well documented, and is quite easy to use if you know a little bit of Python. So yeah, great is to the author who did an amazing job with the package. So how do these other stem works? The first thing that you do with your data, so imagine your data above these weeks, is to create a temporal partition. In our case, for this case of the birds, we did a temporal partition of 5 weeks. So you get data only in 5 weeks period. You do that in another time of the year and in many times of the year. So in some places, these windows, they overlap. So you get exactly the same data, but with different temporal windows. And then after you do this temporal partition, for each of these windows, you create something called quad tree, which is basically the spatial partition. And how this spatial partition works, basically you divide your study area, in our case is Europe, into squares, which are called quad trees, where areas with data pool regions, so where you have less data, the squares are much bigger than in areas where you have much more data. And so in data rich areas, you have smaller squares. These numbers on how big they are, the squares, and how many days or how many weeks to use, they're not coming out of the blue. People in the corner lab of ornithology, the eBird people, let's say, they've been working with these type of models for quite a long time, and they have extensive literature on these models. So basically, we kind of adapt what these numbers that they use, especially in North America and the whole America, to our European case. So the idea is that you create this spatial partition, and basically in each of these squares you fit a model, a base model. So in this square I fit one model, in this second square I fit another model, a third model, a fourth model, sixth model, and so on. So in every square you fit one model. And once you have this, you have something called an ensemble. So the whole structure or the whole square at the European scale, this is called an ensemble model, right? But because we want to get the best of the data and we want to basically combine many times the predictions, we not just simply do one ensemble at the European scale, we do this many times. We repeat this many times. In our case, we repeat it 100 times for each of the temporal windows. So you can imagine that these are many models. And basically, at the end, when you have all these models combined with different data for the same location, you combine it in one single prediction in every single location. So in every 10 by 10 grid cell, we get all the predictions from all the different partitions, temporal and spatial partitions, together in one single location. So what that helps is to counteract the fact that in some places we have much less data. For example, in the eastern countries or in Russia, we have almost data. In Turkey, we have little data compared to areas where we have very rich data areas like Western Europe. So this type of modeling, what helps you is to balance out all those different areas. And because you run the model so many times with different partitions of the data, then you balance out the results. And then what you get is a much more fair vision of what is happening in every location. So for each of these models, we use a base model, which was XGBoost. So basically, XGBoost is kind of a machine learning model, like a random forest model that use boosting, which basically sequentially corrects the errors of the previous trees. And because in the EVP data, we have zero inflation. So in many places, you can observe a species, but in that species might only occur in, for example, in north of Europe at a certain moment. In the rest of the Europe, it's not occurring, so we have many zeros. We use a so-called harder model. And a harder model is also a framework to counteract this zero inflation, which can be applied in many different cases. And the idea behind these harder models is that you divide your data into a binary transformation. So you divide between zeros and ones. So if you see, for example, this is the response variable. At the beginning, we have zeros, and then we have 3, 5, 2, 10, 20. So we binarize it to have, again, all the zeros and then ones. And then you train that model, and you create that classifier. And then you divide the data again only in the positive data. So only the 3, 5, 2, and 10 observations. And then once you have that, you create predictions for both models, and at the end you combine them. So this model, for example, predicted that at the beginning you have 0, 0, and then you have presences of the species, and then you combine that with the predictions of the positive model that tells you, okay, at the beginning I saw that, or I predicted that I have 5 and 9, but because the binary model tell me that it's 0, then I put a 0 here, and then you combine the presences with the abundances that the model predicted. This is just a simple way to, or not so simple, to combine the best of both worlds and to counteract the effect of zero inflation. So once you have all those models run, basically the final end is that we combine predictions of around 65,000 base models belonging to these 100 ensemble sets of stickers per species. So each species had around 65,000 models. And well, for each species, it took around 10 hours to 2 days to run in an HPC, in a high performance computer. And we use around, yeah, between 30 and 150 gigabytes of memory. So going into the nice parts, the results. Uh, Basically, we had to validate whether these models are good. So we did cross validation in each stick cell. You separate the data into 30% uh, for the testing and 70% for the training, and then you get yeah, different matrices that tells you how good is your model, right? So just to walk through this very large table, basically for most of the species, we have a high AUC value, which is a metric that tells you more or less whether the distribution was accurately predicted. So if it's above 0.7, in general, you can assume that the distribution is somehow properly predicted. So in most of the species, we were above this 0.7. Some species that they are very common actually, like for example, the common buzzard or the starlings, they have a less AUC, and that's basically because they are so common that it is difficult to predict where they are because they can occur in many different environments. So they don't have a very specific habitat type. So then that creates more trouble for the model to predict. In terms of recall, we had also quite a high value. So this means basically that the models were really good in predicting where are the species and how many, or where are basically areas with high abundance numbers. So they were, yeah, in general, the recall values, they were quite high. However, the values of the precision were a bit lower, and that means that we are not so good in predicting the exact numbers of the high abundance area. So this tells us that, okay, although you predict where they are, you cannot predict how many in that sense or that accurately. Still, the mean absolute error was quite okay. So it tells us that we don't deviate too much from the numbers that we see, but the R square is also a bit yeah, a bit too low. So that is again not really predicting the best of the abundances. But still, given the mixed nature of this data set with millions and millions of observations with million models done, well, we were really happy to see that the models were actually quite good, and okay, they are not perfect, but this had a very nice first step to go into this direction. So thanks to this, we can do nice visualizations, and here I will show you some examples of what is the result of it. So this is the distribution of the common crane. So normally they breed in the north part of Europe and Russia, and they winter in the south part of Europe. So in the first weeks of the year, we will expect them to be more in the south of Europe, and then through the time, they should move towards the north. And that's exactly what we see with these models. We start at the beginning, we see their migration, this nice migratory path, and then they go up towards Northern Europe where they breed. Some of them, they go to Russia, so we see less numbers. And then during the autumn migration, which is happening now, and actually the cranes will start their journey maybe in a week or 2 weeks, you could start seeing them already migrating. Then they go back to the wintering areas in Spain where they pass their winter. So thanks to this modeling and all this data, we can actually quite properly predict where are the high number of the species at a certain moment of the year. So we can see the phenology on time. This is similar to species that, for example, they go out of the range of Europe, like, for example, the greater white-fronted goose. They go all the way to northern Russia to breed, but during winter they stay in North Europe. So that's what we actually see during the winter. At the beginning of the year, they are in Northern Europe, and then at some point for the breeding season, they start the journey all the way to Russia, where they disappear out of our observations, of course, because they are simply not there. So during several weeks of the year, during the breeding and summer, we don't see them, and then we see them coming back and staying in our northern parts of Europe. But for the bird-fruit radar, actually, EFSA asked us to make it to being able to combine it with epidemiological data and with the ringing data to make these models at 50 by 50 kilometers. So we aggregated the data, which, okay, creates a bit more coarse image of what's happening with the species, but still we can see, like, for example, white storks are always present in Spain now. Very few of them, of the Spanish populations, they go to Africa for the winter. And we can see also how they come back to Europe through the Eastern African flyway, through Turkey, and basically invade Europe during the breeding season. So this was published already in a report that we made, and that is open access, so you can access it freely. But we were not happy just with having this early warning system and these models. So we started to do some future steps and some exploratory work, which I will also present here. So yeah, one of the things that we thought is that it would be nice to include new predictors that they actually also vary over time. And that is, for example, weather data that nowadays remote sensing data is becoming much easier to obtain and to use. So in this exploration of new predictors, we work together with the SEED project, which is the Spatially Explicit Environmental Data, which basically is a project that tries to facilitate the use also of remote sensing data for researchers. So we got from them daily temperatures, rain, snow cover from the period of our bird data, so from 2015 to 2021. So you can see here, for example, the snow cover at different weeks of the year. This is actually for the period of 2021, and I don't know if there is any Spaniard in the audience as me, but in that year, actually, in the first week of the year in January, we had a huge snowfall in the whole of Spain that, well, we can actually observe with this type of data because yeah, well, it's accurate data and we can see it in this little map. So we got this snow cover and, for example, also the average surface temperatures during the weeks. And we ran the same sets of models. And then what we saw is that when we included weather data, just matching up the weeks that we have the bird data with the weeks that we have the environmental data, we didn't see a large impact on the matrices of the different models. We saw that more or less the models, they were quite similar. Okay, in some cases they were a bit worse, in some cases they were a bit better, but they were not a huge impact. But what this weather data provides you is actually another source of information for predicting and for forecasting at a weekly scale the different abundances of birds. So we can see how, for example, early in the year, there is a positive relationship of the abundance of birds together with the average surface temperature, because of course they stay in lower latitudes because that's what they like. They like to not be cold in the winter, right? But while the season starts moving, and for example it comes to May, to the breeding month, basically, we see that this is changing, and this is because they move towards northern areas where the average temperature, of course, is lower over the time. Over the weeks, but we see that this relationship changes, and this helps us actually to also understand the environmental niche of the species. So, for example, this Eurasian teal, they have a much broader range of temperatures that they can use than, for example, the white-fronted goose that I showed you before, that they just stay in areas always between 0 and 20 degrees or 0 and 10 degrees. So they are much restricted in their niche. And we can use this information actually for forecasting, because we don't know how many birds are going to be next week in a certain place of Europe, but our weather forecast models, they are quite accurate nowadays. So we could use this information to say, okay, what's going to happen in week number 9 in a certain place in Europe, and not just based on static variables, but on a dynamic variable that we can actually predict. So these variables actually, they don't only help us to this, but even if the models, they were not improving a lot, what we saw when we got the importance of the different variables is that these variables, they were actually among the top 20 covariables that we put for many species. So you can see that they contribute a lot actually in the explanatory power of the distribution of the birds. So that's also something important to take into account, because basically birds and almost any migratory species, they follow the environment. So if we are able to implement that into our models, that give us a lot of power. So this exploration of the weather, but also of the movement model that the BTO created, they try to integrate also GPS data into their ringing data model, movement model. That was also published in another report, so you can also access it and you can read it through it. If you have questions or anything, please feel free to contact any of the team. We'll be happy to answer any question. But we are still looking for more applications, and we were thinking that, okay, now we have these weekly abundance maps, weekly models, that they tells us a lot of information about the data, but we can maybe get a bit more of it. So basically, we are also exploring how we can use them to derive connectivity between places. So try to get the information that we get with the ringing data or with the GPS data from this abundance data, which is much more rich in data, but it's a bit more different. So the idea is that we start with these weekly abundances, right? So this is actually the same example as with the crane. So you can see the nice migratory path, or kind of you can infer it just by looking at it, but how can we actually extract it from the data? Well, so the idea is that we first got the high concentration areas. So we calculated what is called the quantile 60, which is the minimum area where 60% of the population, or accounting that the population is the whole Europe, where is that 60% of the population in a certain moment. So we got that 60 quantile 60 for week X, that can be week number 1, and you can see the points in blue, for example. And then we can get the same thing for 2 weeks after, or 3 weeks after, or any time after. And that creates certain high concentration areas that we can observe over the course of the year. And we can also know how was the mean abundance or median abundance over a certain time period. So in this case, we got the median abundance of 5 weeks to create a so-called conductance layer, which basically tells you more or less the pathways that the birds follow. And thanks to that, we can also apply a connectivity model. In this case, we apply a minimum planar graph model, but you can also apply a least cost path model or any type of model. And thanks to this model, we can see the pathways that they are likely to be used by the birds at a certain time of the year. So we know that these pathways, that they are lighter in the color, for example, they are less costly for the birds because they use them than some dark pathways that they are probably very unlikely that they will use them. So thanks to that, we can actually observe, okay, what are the possible movements within Europe of the different bird species at different times of the year, and then infer, for example, that this migratory path is repeated over time, for example, and that it's likely that the species will pass through it, but also that they can be exchanged between different populations. One population that can be infected by avian influenza can see another population that is not affected by avian influenza if they are close by, for example. So this give us a new also sets of ideas, but this is still a lot of work in progress. This is something that we are developing right now. We are just thinking about it, getting all these maps, discussing them and working on them. So this is still something that is not yet published or anything, but well, we we think that it's possible to derive from these weekly abundance maps some more information that just simply the abundance locations, right? So just to finish the presentation, just a couple of take-home messages, very simple. I hope that I convince you that these LSTM models are very powerful tools for modeling spatiotemporal relationships of very heterogeneous data. So this EVP data is very nice because it has millions and millions of data points, but it's very heterogeneous. We have many observations in one places, but not in others. And thanks to these LSTM models, we can get the best of both worlds and combine them to get estimates at very large scales. And then the second take-home message, and especially for this group of European Forecasting Initiative, it's quite important to keep stressing that remote sensing data at a high temporal resolution is a very useful tool for forecasting. And I think we should keep thinking or keep implementing these dynamic variables in our modeling, because they can give us not only a lot of insights of the species or the behavior of the species, but also it gives us another way and another tool for make future predictions. So with that, I would like to finish my presentation, and thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for the invitation. And if you have any question, please, don't hesitate to ask.
Thank you so much, Juan. It was mesmerizing. I really liked your work, and I think it's so relevant to our group because we've been discussing a lot some applications in Europe, and this is such a concrete application with also implications to us, to humans. So I have several questions, but I bet there are also in the audience. Are there any questions in the audience? Maybe I can. Yeah, okay, Maria, go ahead.
No, I think I saw Luis was speaking, but I think his micro was off. So I don't know if he was speaking to someone in his office or asking a question. So,
hi everyone. Yeah, I was actually talking to myself about a question that I might actually be interested in. So since I'm talking now, I can just do it. Thanks, Juan. It was a super interesting talk and the work you're doing.
Thank you.
I'm actually curious in these like ADAS team or whatever they're called models. What about autocorrelation at spatial and temporal levels? Like, is that taken into account somehow, somewhere, at some step, or can you ignore it at some, safely? What about these kind of things?
Yeah, so the idea of all these spatial and temporal partitioning, so all the steps that you first get a small window temporally and then you make the spatial, is that you feed the models just with parts of the data. So then you decrease that the spatial and temporal autocorrelation. So first, temporally, let's say that you get only 5 weeks of data, like we did. So you only get 5 weeks of data, and that temporal autocorrelation with more data after those 5 weeks is already discarded. And then when you split spatially the data, so when you make these quadries, these quadrants, you only feed the data within that quadrant. So you have the model for only that single square. So then the spatial autocorrelation with other places is also much more decreased. So the idea is that with all these splits, and you do this many times, as I showed you. The idea behind it is that you decrease that the spatial and temporal autocorrelation by splitting the data so many times and in so many different ways that you decrease that autocorrelation. But at the same time, you mix the same data points. So let's say week 1 is mixed with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but also with week number 50, 51, 52, 1, 2, and 3. So the same data sets or the same data point is mixed so many times with different windows that in the end your prediction is made of all this combination. So then the spatial and temporal autocorrelation is decreased, but also the prediction is coming from different perspectives.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
So basically the idea is that you repeat so many times the process in so many different ways that gives you such a large number of models and estimates that then all these problems with the spatial temporal autocorrelation, they are decreased.
Okay, makes sense. That just brings me to like a short question afterwards, which is like maybe you said it, maybe I didn't get it. Let's say call it randomizing both temporally and spatially, like the quadrants and whatever they're called. It is based on like pure random randomization. Okay.
Yeah, it's pure. Everything is pure random. So you can get week number 5, and then you mix it with the 5 weeks, and then you automatically also make random quadrant with a random orientation. The only thing that is not random, let's say, is that when you make the first big quadrant, then you start dividing in smaller quadrants within this big one. But again, you make that so many times that at the end everything is random, and you basically you trust that you do it so many times in so many different ways that what you get is the real signal.
Okay.
Real.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Victoria, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Juan, for a nice presentation, for a very clear presentation, and for a great product. I have a question of understanding. I'm struggling to imagine, to understand how having these larger quadrants that you have for the data poor regions. So I understand how model averaging and how model assembly may result in a better product, but for those data poor regions, since we anyways have poor data and we place their larger quadrants, I cannot intuitively grasp how that leads to a better quality averaged result. Could you perhaps try to explain that? I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear. Sorry.
No. Thank you for the words, and I think it's really clear your question. The simple answer is that, well, in data poor regions, we just simply need more data. That's the clear thing, of course. But with these bigger quadrants, what you try to do is to mix the very where you have also similar environmental conditions. So that's why you restrict your spatial area to just one of these quadrants to try to capture the relationships with environmental conditions within that quadrant for the data poor areas. So the idea is that maybe I didn't explain it properly, but you only split the quadrant when you have sufficient data that you set up in the modeling. When you have sufficient data, and also when the quadrant is too large. So I could also make this quadrant much larger, and for example get from Turkey to Russia, for example, and then get all the data points there. But that might be too big to have this relationship between environmental variables and the birth data in this case, right? So then you split it, and then you get a smaller quadrant. And yeah, the idea is that you try to combine data poor areas with data poor areas and try to make a bit more richer data set instead of just putting everything together. Because if you put everything together, then maybe those data poor areas will actually be outliers in your modeling. So that's the rationale behind of this type of modeling. But yeah, for example, you could see in the maps that especially in Russia and Eastern countries, sometimes there were big blobs of birds. And that's probably an artifact of the models that they capture the environmental correlation, so the relationships with environmental variables in a different location, and then they predict that big blob, and maybe it's a bit artifact. But the idea is that, again, you do this so many times and you combine the different data sets in different ways that you try to decrease that and then improve a little bit the estimations in those data poor areas. But yeah, if you have poor areas with sampling sites, then it is tricky, of course, to quantify them. Actually, in the connectivity analysis, we completely exclude this Russia part and Turkey because, yeah, it was just simply nonsense to try to use those areas for the connectivity analysis. I don't know if I answered your question, but.
Yeah, maybe to follow up on this, if I may. So since there is, it's known that there is a scale dependence in environmental relationships, so how environment affects either abundance or growth rate, etc. How do you think choosing these cells or these quadrants, you call them, sorry, of different size affects the final inference that you make on these environmental relationships? How environment affects abundance?
They can affect because at the end you split the data just to use the data in that quadrant or in that grid cell or whatever. So that affects. We in this project we had the time to actually explore a lot different sizes, let's say. So that's why I use 2,000 kilometers as the bigger quadrant, because that's based on the explorations that all the people in the corner lab of ornithology, they made it. And also this 5 weeks temporal period, they also make some explorations. And actually they argue, and I think it's a very valid argument, that these setups, they try to mimic the pace of migration and the pace that the birds move. So yeah, maybe for very mobile species like the cranes or the geese, maybe we could try to explore to have larger quadrants or something. But still, yeah, we need to try to mimic their way. So yeah, these numbers, as I said, they are not coming out of the blue. They are coming from a rationale of other papers mostly. Unfortunately, within the project, we couldn't do a full meta-analysis of trying to get the best scale, but intuitively also from an ornithologist perspective, I think these numbers, they mimic quite well the species.
Thanks.
Are there other questions? One question I had was about like model uncertainty, and if you report that, and especially the fact that like for the data lag parts, is there a way to also accumulate the model uncertainty? I was curious about that.
Yeah, so I didn't present it, but the package actually, there's a way of getting the model uncertainty, because you have all these fitted models that you can know how good is one single model, one single ensemble. You can get the errors of that model, and actually within the package you can also extract the uncertainty within the different areas. So for each grid cell, I could also get the uncertainty. It's true that maybe it would be nice to put it here. So then all these data poor areas will actually pop up as the most uncertain areas against the very rich areas that we have very good knowledge. And then for the model, it's really easy to say, oh, here you have this amount of birds, because I have so much data that is just simply it's simple to calculate. Yeah, that's a good question.
Maria?
Yes, thank you also from me. It was a wonderful presentation, and like really lovely to see such a fantastic application, real life application of useful application of forecasting. So and sorry, I may have missed it, but so all of these workflows and all of these predictions, they're automated. So you have set them up to get new data? And or do you have to like then, you know, you have the predictions and then you have to like actually collect the data later on, or is this is it automated? I'm asking because often it's very difficult with these types of biodiversity data, you know, to have it automated because there's no automated data, but for the birds, it's maybe different.
You mean in the final application, in the early warning system?
Yeah, yes, in the final, like, you know, like now, like for instance, it automatically updates all the predictions. So like, you know, so it's made a way that it's into the future, like for the next year, say, like you still have automated predictions weekly.
Yeah. So we are the honest question and the shortest answer is that it's not yet automated, but we are working on it actually. So
Nice.
ideally we want to also keep using this weather data and exploring the power. Actually, it was funny. I mentioned this Spanish snowfall because in some of the bird species I could actually see the same pattern as the snowfall in that week 1 in 2021 because I was just predicting for that week. So my idea is to actually train the model just with weekly averages over the years and not just exactly because we, especially now in the climate change context, we are seeing more of these extreme cases. So I want to train the model just with the weekly averages and then get the signal better of the impact of the weekly temperatures or snowfall or whatever, and then we can predict better for the future. But probably we want to keep working on this and get a follow-up and then try to automatize all the process of getting the bird data of both the ringing center and the EVP data, and then model it, and then send the predictions automatically to the people doing the epidemiological model, and then upload it. So some processes are quite well automatized, but not fully. So we are working on it. But in theory, we see the possibilities of it's possible to make it, I think.
I just want to have a follow-up on that. I was curious, what is the bottleneck for you? Is it just like technical that you just need to do it, or is there a way, for example, typically thinking some of the databases I use, they just don't have API calls, so you cannot automatize. Like, I was curious for you, what's the bottleneck?
Well, right now, in my case, it's simply that the pre-processing of the data is also quite time consuming. So I first need to get the data and then I need to pre-process it. I didn't go into all the story of generating zeros and pseudo absences or all these steps that are really bad on SDMs, because that was a lot of work also. So that's also another step that you need to implement. And then you need to run the models and then you need to send it. So right now, basically the steps are that I receive the data from the EVP data set, then I pre-process it, I run the models, and then I send the results to, in this case, Epimundi to make the epidemiological model. So the bottleneck is that in the end, there are so many steps that they are not easy, that it complicates also a lot of the workflow. So and also the EVP data is also good to mention. They are working on enriching even more the data set. So there is a live project now running, which is called Live EVP, which is trying to first establish new monitoring schemes in countries like Eastern countries like Albania or Macedonia, or these type of countries that they have little people gathering data sets. So in the data poor areas, they are trying to convince people to count birds and to send the data straight to the EVP data. So this EVP data is constantly updating. And that workflow, they have it really well set up. They have APIs for everything. And now we need to work on transmitting the data to me, in this case, to the researcher to run the models and everything. But there are so many steps that it's a bit tricky.
I understand. Yeah, go ahead, Jody, please.
Yeah, and I know we're getting close to time, so I'll make it short. But it sort of goes along with that, the automating of the data and thinking about the early warning and detection for avian influenza. Is there a certain time frame that is useful for like policy and reacting? And yeah, what's the time frame for making those predictions to make it useful for? Oh, and is there like a way to pick like one species to help reduce like the processing time?
So the I cannot answer very well this question because it's more on the final part of the product. But basically, in the final application, we mix all the species together because they all possess a risk of transmitting the avian influenza, right? So we send that all together to Epimundi, who has, I think, they have more automatization on the way that they get the outbreaks of avian influenza faster, I think, from EFSA, and then they make the probabilities of transmitting the avian influenza, and that. Yeah, I actually not very sure how EFSA communicates with the different countries or farmers or whatever. How do they communicate? Like, hey, there is a high risk that next week there will be a lot of wild birds around, and maybe some of them carry the disease. That actually I cannot really answer. I'm sorry. But yeah, that's at the end of the. What I know is that yeah, EFSA in general is really happy with the result and that people are using it. So yeah, I think that's the first step to make it better and to convince people that this type of modeling is useful and that we can actually help not just the birds, that is normally what drives organizations like Sovon, but also the people. So yeah, this is a thing.
Great, thanks. Really nice presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juan. We already exceeded a little bit our time, and it was such a great presentation, such a great discussion, very helpful for us.